Everyone, I'm Marcus Grimm, Chief Marketing Officer with GXA IT. We are thrilled to have you with us for today's program. Cybersecurity is a strategy, not a tool set. We are going to give the panelists or the attendees are streaming in even as we speak. We're going to wait our number one panelist today, George Makaye, who you are going to love hearing from. We just need about 1.5 more minutes to get started. So we're going to get started right at 12:03 p.m. or I'm sorry, 11:03 a.m. We will get started in exactly 3 minutes. So please keep hanging on and we will be with you momentarily. Thank you. All right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Marcus Grimm, and I am thrilled to get started with today's program. As I said, my name is Marcus. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer here at GXA IT, and you are here to listen to our presentation today. Cybersecurity is a strategy, not a tool set. This is going to be a fun one. First off, I want to thank everyone who's come to join us today. We have a lot of people attending, and also really happy to see that we have a lot of AI note takers attending as well. I don't know about you, but I find my AI note taker saves me a lot of time, particularly on presentations like this. As a matter of fact, I will give you a tip in terms of how you could use AI to make this presentation even more useful for you. After this particular presentation, we will obviously send you the slides as well as the video so you can watch it. And hey, if I were you, if you haven't had the time to really figure out how you can apply this to your business, one of the things that I love to do is pull the transcript off that show. Pull the transcript off that show, feed it into AI and say, hey, listen, what are the 3 or 4 things that are going to be most actionable for my business to get started with today? And I would encourage you to do that. I love seeing the AI note takers in the room. It makes me really, really happy. As I mentioned, look, it's a typical webinar. So this probably is not your first rodeo, folks, but here's what that means. We have a Q&A panel right here. Please feel free to put any of those questions that you have as they come in. We'll hold some Q&As to the end. We might do them in the middle of the show, depending on what works best for our flow today. Now, speaking about our show, what's going to be happening today? Well, I'm joined today by George Makaye, probably a friend to many of you who are on the program. George is the CEO of GXA IT, which is one of the most experienced George is one of the most experienced cybersecurity advisors working with Dallas area organizations. George has helped companies recover from breaches, assess their risk posture, and implement security frameworks that actually work. This session is not about products or buzzwords, though. It's actually about what business leaders need to understand and own when it comes to security. And listen, we want to talk about, this particular show. This is something that George and I said we really wanted to do. We wanted this to be interactive. We wanted it to be engaging. So when we talk about security today, you're going to be hearing some names that you're really familiar with if you pay any attention to the local news. We're actually going to be talking about some major security breaches that have happened right here in the Dallas area over the past couple of years. And we're going to be going beyond the headlines and sort of figure out, okay, so these breaches that happened, well, why did they occur? And how could have they be avoided? Because let's face it, none of us want to end up on the news as one of those stories. George has turned on his camera. George, how are we doing today?
Fantastic.
Oh, wonderful.
I'm glad to be here. Thanks to everybody who's joined us today.
Absolutely. We got a great crowd here. And as I mentioned, we got several AI note takers, which is wonderful. It seems like they're in all the meetings with us. Absolutely. All right, friends, let's get started. Why are we even talking about this topic today? Well, look, cyber attacks, they're not just distant headlines anymore. They're disrupting core services right here in North Texas. We're talking about 911 systems, payroll, court records. And in almost all the cases, this is going to be really interesting. Like, George is not going to come on and say, oh, you know what, if they would have had this tool plugged in, it would have been great. It's not about tools. It's about a missing process. The question we're tackling today then is, what separates these companies that recover quickly from the ones that spiral? And to really bring this story home, again, we're going to be talking about some of the biggest IT security stories that have happened in the Dallas area over the past few years. These are real stories, headlines taken from the local news. They've all been covered by the local news, but today we will be looking at what really happened, what the failures were, and most importantly, how you can keep your business from ending up in those headlines. George, I'm going to start right from the jump here. We've got an example here of two stories that probably everyone in the audience heard about over the past couple of years. These are Dallas, two organizations that had similar tools in place, but very, very different outcomes. Let's take a look at these two. What do we have here?
Yeah, Marcus, thank you so much for the introduction. So I want to give this really real-world example between these two organizations. Both Dallas Central Appraisal District, DCAD, and Dallas County were targeted by phishing attacks. They both had security tools such as, obviously, firewalls, threat detection, and security monitoring systems, but their outcomes were very different. DCAD hadn't practiced a response. They didn't have a rhythm. No one knew their role, and they ended up paying $170,000 and spent weeks trying to recover. Meanwhile, Dallas County had a plan. They'd rehearsed the plan, activated it quickly, and stayed up and running. So what we're finding is that the difference, for the most part, wasn't technical, or it wasn't the tools. It was the structure and the preparation behind it. And that's what made all the difference.
Yeah, so let's take a look at these organizations here. Some real world impact, right? So we have the Dallas Central Appraisal District. So what are they responsible for? Well, they're tracking and updating property values. So we're not going to dive into all the implications about that, but you can imagine if nobody can get their appraisal reports, well, what happens when that system goes down? You've got real estate transactions that can't happen. Mortgages can't be approved, right? Everything, when we talk about real estate, it goes back to those property values. If the appraisal system's down, where those appraisal values going to come from? But what George is saying is really important here. Both situations here, it did not come down to technology. Even with the same tech stack, it actually comes down to execution. But a lot of the leaders that we often hear from feel confident that, well, everything's installed. I don't have anything to worry about. I've got these tools in place. George, why isn't that enough?
So just having the security tools in place doesn't mean that your team is ready when something goes wrong. Let's take City of Dallas as an example. They had security alerts, so which means the tools were working. And those alerts were coming in for weeks before the ransomware attack, but no one stepped in to act. Or Mr. Cooper, a local mortgage company, they suffered a major breach exposing millions of customer records. The tools were there and they were running, but there was no clear responsibility and no response plan or leadership direction. So the point is, to your point, Marcus, is security tools don't lead people. They don't make decisions. They don't, run the program. That's a leadership responsibility. And without a clear structure in place, the tools alone are not enough.
Yeah, and that's a fascinating point, George, and it almost makes me wonder about, I think periodically at some point in our life we've all been in a situation where there's an alarm going off, and we're very aware that an alarm's going off, but you might be like, is that a smoke alarm? Should I be doing anything? What should I do? So two great examples there of the tools were doing their thing, but the people didn't. And when we talk about these breaches, George, sometimes the failure isn't even a true security breach. It's not a brute force attack. It can be something quieter that's just buried in routine, right?
Absolutely. Some of the costly security failures that we've seen didn't come from hackers, for example, actively breaking into those organizations. Dallas County, for example, wired $2.4 million to a scammer, all because of a convincing phishing email. So that's an example where no firewall was breached. It was a process gap in their vendor payment controls. Dallas ISD, as another example, had student records exposed due to weak internal permissions, not an external attack. So also at Rackspace, they lost emails for thousands of customers because of not patching their servers, which led to a hacker exploiting the existing vulnerability. In every case, the real issue or the root cause was not the technology. The tools were there. It was internal assumptions, missing processes, lack of oversight, lack of accountability, missing structure. That's where the real risk lives.
It's interesting, George. A lot of these examples that we've been over thus far, we not to pick on government, but we had the county appraisal system. We have Dallas County right here, and sometimes it's hard for us to connect the dots, right? If I'm a small business, but the Rackspace one is interesting, right? Because they lost the ability to email our customers, and I think 100% of the people in this show would say that's kind of a big deal. If I lose the ability to actually send emails on a timely basis, that's how we get in touch with our customers. So we're really talking about some really tremendous impacts, regardless of the size of the organization. So you've been hinting around this word leadership and process. I'm getting the idea that that's what's actually missing in these environments, even when the tools are in place. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's correct. After analyzing dozen of breach reports, and those are readily available online. And really, from my 25 years in cybersecurity, the pattern is almost always the same. Many times, what we find is that the basic tools are in place. Well, and there are cases where they're not. So this is not to imply that every single time the tools are there, but many times the tools are in place. An example of those tools could be endpoint protection, email security, network security. But what we find is that the root cause of the issue is that tools tend to give leadership false confidence. We find that the root cause of these breaches typically point to the fact that no one had tested what to do if something went wrong. No one had rehearsed. No one was clearly in charge, and no one was making sure that it's all working. So security breaks down when there's no structure to support those tools. It's not just a technical issue, it's a leadership and accountability problem. And without clear ownership and a regular rhythm, even the best tools will fail.
Yeah, so we've kind of started this show a little bit on a downer, right? We pointed out a lot of things that have happened in Dallas. It's like, wow, breach here, breach there, $2.4 million sent here, emails lost there. But let's flip the coin on this. Okay, what are we trying to accomplish? What actually makes a company resilient when something does go wrong?
So cybersecurity resilience really starts with structure. You build the security structure the same way you build reliability in any critical part of your business. You define who's responsible, you assign ownership and accountability, you put the right tools and processes in place after you've assigned who's the owner, who's accountable, and then you test and rehearse on a frequent basis. When security is treated as a leadership discipline, just like finance or operations, it becomes something you can measure and manage and trust to hold up when it matters most.
Yeah, and this is so critical and it's so important, right? But it's one of those things that it's a really easy slide for somebody to read and say, yeah, that makes sense. But as in many things, the ideas are one thing, the execution is the other. I know one of the solutions that we provide at GXA is helping teams put that type of structure in place. How does the team go about doing that?
Yeah, so at GXA, we work with leadership teams to turn security into something that's actionable, not just technical. And we do have technical conversations with our clients during meetings. But what we do is we help clarify, who's responsible for what, how decisions are made, and where there may be gaps in structural oversight. And then we guide them through, annual rehearsals, like we call them tabletop exercises of response to incidents, evaluating the overall readiness through annual assessments, and then tracking meaningful metrics, not just the technical ones. Our goal is to make things a little simpler because technology and security can be a little complex, and make security something, the leadership team can understand, they can measure and manage, just like any other part of the business.
George, you mentioned you've been in this space for 25 years. And if I think back to technology 25 years ago, at the turn of the century, if you will, I'm assuming some of your first security customers back then, they were probably the obvious ones, right? We're talking about highly sensitive data, regulated environments. But now when we talk about cybersecurity, suddenly this is something that all businesses need to be concerned about. Why is that? What's happened in the past 25 years?
You're right, Marcus. Security used to be just for regulated industries or large corporate companies that had, big budgets. But today, every business is a target. Attacks are automated, they're widespread and opportunistic. And if you're connected, if you're online, you're a target and you're at risk. So cybersecurity now is essential to stay operational and protect your reputation.
So I think it's really well said. So this is one of those things that before, I think we would read those articles and be like, well, I'm glad that can't happen here. But the reality is these days it is happening everywhere. Now, for the early part of this presentation, we've been talking about it's not the tools, it's the structure in place. But one of the things that I find interesting is your team, when you come in to help your customers with security, you actually do roll out a couple tools, but I don't think of them as technology tools. I think of them as here are sort of reporting tools, if you will, to help executives begin to visualize, if you will, what the security footprint looks like. So I know you have a few here, and obviously these are the types of things that the GXA is suggesting. Hey, listen, if you buy into the first part of this presentation, which is there is risk in your organization, these are the types of tools your team should be reviewing on a regular basis to kind of have a good way to eyeball what's happening in your organization. How do you think about it?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of IT vendors that I think approach security from just tools where they lead with tools, but I think that's where they get it wrong. Because in the breaches we've seen, the real issue usually is in the technology. It's a lack of structure, lack of clear ownership, lack of processes, lack of kind of regular reviews or practice runs. And it has to be built like any other business process with clear accountability expectations and consistent check-ins, having those either monthly or quarterly meetings, right, to review your security maturity and or maybe making policy decisions. So at GXA, we don't just install the tools and the software and hope for the best. We help businesses build the system around it, and so that it actually works when they need it the most.
So that structure, that ownership, the process, the frame, right? It's so critical, and I feel like there's probably a webinar 3 right in there. But let's make this a little bit let's make it a little bit simpler for our audience to visualize. When you talk about bringing tools to a leadership meeting, I love that your virtual chief security officers, they actually have these reports. Tell us about a few of them.
Sure. So, once leadership has the right, like you say, has the right structure in place, there's some tools that, we use to make risk easy to see and decisions easier to make. so that, it's not just all technical, right? It's a little bit of what I'll call surfacing the right signals at the right time and giving them something that they can actually visualize that makes sense. Because typically when we're dealing with customers, we're dealing with non-technical audience. And so we'll go through those tools in the next slide.
Terrific. And I love this analogy because I think in some parts of our business, right, we're kind of hardwired to have reports. So on the marketing side, we're reporting how many leads do we get, how many emails were opened. On the customer service side, it's how quickly did we respond to incoming requests. What George is suggesting here is the idea of, well, what would those reports look like from an IT perspective? I want to start with your scorecard. Business leaders, I always see people lean in when we say scorecard or dashboard, like we all love them. What does your scorecard show for a business leader?
So the executive scorecard gives leadership a simpler view of how the organization is performing on security. It tracks practical things like how quickly threats are detected and handled, and how vulnerable their team is to phishing, and whether backups are being used, and tested frequently so that they actually work. And it's just designed to be viewed alongside what I would call your finance and operation reports, so security becomes just as measurable and manageable as any other part of the business.
I think this should be a major aha for the audience, right? You literally just said it right here. You're showing this type of information alongside your finance and ops reports. And that to me is a critical distinction, because we already know in our business, hey, let's see cash in, let's see cash out, let's see as our operating teams doing the job. You're now suggesting that we elevate security to executive level visibility. Is that something that most organizations are doing?
No, it's actually rare that IT has that type of visibility, but I think it's critical.
Sure. So that gives executives visibility into what's happening, which, like, that's the first step, right? Because what gets measured gets managed. But how do you know then? So this will tell me, red light, green light, or however the team color codes it. But how do you know where those real weaknesses are across the business then?
So that's really where the security maturity assessment comes into play. And what the security maturity assessment really does is, I would say, shine a light on where the biggest threats and risks are, not just in your technology, but across your organization. It highlights things like missing processes, unclear roles, vendors who are operating outside kind of the authority of the organization or oversight. And this is often where leadership really gets caught off guard, because most leaders assume that security risk live only in IT, but the assessment results typically tell something different. Cybersecurity and risks often show up in departments like, obviously, finance, HR, marketing, and operations, areas that a lot of the times use cloud tools or outside vendors without much visibility and oversight. The goal is to help, the leaders make decisions based on real risk, not just assumptions, and give them kind of clear path to improve instead of guessing where to start.
That's really smart. So the security maturity assessment, that's the second tool that we've talked about today. Now, once you kind of see where these risk areas are, then how do you find out what applications are in use and which ones are most exposed in your environment?
Yeah, so we have a tool called the Business Systems Map, which is an example of a tool that we use to provide clearer view of the vendors, the platforms, and systems in the organization, but not in technical terms like IP addresses. Instead, it provides visibility into the applications being used, what's exposed, and potential third-party risk. And it often exposes things leaders don't see, like shadow IT, sensitive data that's being stored in unsecured or unapproved applications, unmanaged user access, and unauthorized subscriptions, and overlapping vendors. With that type of visibility, leaders can make smarter decisions about where to invest, where to tighten things up, and how to align their security efforts with real business priorities.
So one of the things that I think the audience might might be wondering about is you mentioned these third-party vendors, or as you know, it's the SaaS world, right? And certainly that's the type of thing that George, 25 years ago, we didn't see nearly that much of it. And no doubt these systems have all changed our lives for the better. But it's also one of the reasons that security is a bigger deal today, right?
Absolutely. I mean, it used to be all in the past applications resided in-house in a server room or data center, but now most of the tools are in the cloud. So each of these tools like Microsoft 365, QuickBooks Online, HubSpot or Salesforce, whatever CRM you use, Dropbox or Google Drive, they all bring value, but they also bring significantly change the risk profile, because your security is only as strong as your weakest link. And being able to understand the risks that these cloud applications, introduce into your organization is important.
Yeah, that's I think it's really well said. Now, so once we have these tools in place, and I appreciate you going over these three tools. So we've got the scorecard. Where are we up? Where are we down? What's red? What's green? And then we have our business systems map, which is showing us all these different tools that are in place. Once we have these all in place, we now have a lot more clarity. But of course, not every company is going to use that clarity the same way. So now, assuming I have these tools, and look, we said from the jump, tools are often not the issue. And I think the same thing could be said about these reports, right? People often talk about dashboards and reports. Okay, that's fascinating. What do I do with it? Walk us through how the most resilient organizations actually use these tools to build on that visibility over time.
Yeah, so we've seen, the same journey play out over and over again. Mostly it starts when we onboard new clients. I would say they're usually in reactive mode. They're, for the most part, putting out fires after something goes wrong. At this stage, the security is mostly about reacting to incidents. And then typically what happens is they move to stage 2, which is proactive. And at this stage, organizations are starting to anticipate threats. They have basic tools and policies in place, like regular updates, employee training, vulnerability scans. But really what we find is that's where most organizations stop. And then the next stage is the manage, where security becomes part of how the business runs. Leadership is involved, performance is tracked, responsibilities are defined, and there are repeatable processes that are being followed. And so it's no longer a one-off effort, it's embedded into its operations. And then the last stage is the optimize, and this is where mature organizations really operate. And at this stage, security is integrated into how the business runs, and it becomes a strategic advantage, not a burden, so to say.
Right.
What we find is that the difference between companies that bounce back quickly and those that stall is the structure, the rhythms, and really the leadership's level of involvement.
Yeah, it's a really good point. It's interesting, and I'm sure we've all seen these four play out, right? Or at least the first two, right? Organizations where everything is reactive in the IT department, and we don't really realize, we don't even talk about security until something bad happens. The second one's interesting too, proactive. And I know, through my careers, I've been in organizations where they send somebody away, they write, this is our security policy, and then it gets filed away with the other processes that are never revisited again. So, the goal obviously is to get into these top two tiers where you're managing and optimizing. But it's interesting, and I think back to those organizations that I work with or for, where it's really rare to see them get up to this level, this stage 3 or the stage 4. Easier said than done, right? What's the actual playbook for getting there?
Yeah, so I think step 1 is very simple, but I believe very powerful, which is assigning ownership. And here is where someone at the leadership level being accountable. And then typically what we do is step 2 is the assessment, security assessment, and deploying, and developing a plan. And so a security assessment involves, evaluating the organization's ability to protect its systems and operations, from cyber threats. And then typically the next stage is implementation, typically the implementation is where the most visible stage for your team, because that's where the tools, the processes, the controls are actually being rolled out across the organization. And then the next stage is about rehearsing and simulation. So this could be security awareness training for the employees, simulated phishing campaigns are sent out, tabletop exercises so that, we clarify what does happen. Let's say if an incident actually does happen, so people are ready, performing drills and simulations to test your plans and test your defenses. And then the last one is optimization, where you have the rhythm schedule, the monthly meetings, the quarterly meetings, and you're developing some metrics and you're building visibility around the process. So when security is managed like finance and operations, it becomes real.
You said something really interesting there about the optimize, where you're reviewing the progress quarterly. And I think everyone here knows that when we see a scorecard, right, it's just a number, it's a point in time. And what you're really getting at here is the number today matters, but what actually matters more is the next time we do this, is that number going in the right direction, right? Is it improving? Is it getting worse? So, it's interesting to me here when we look at all this, the rehearsals, the tabletop exercises, like that's just a whole new set of business processes that I think most teams would or all teams would really benefit from. So what do you find, what happens when organizations actually experience when they commit to this type of rhythm for security?
Once teams start practicing the response, what we find is that decisions that used to take hours now happen quickly because everybody knows their role. There are fewer surprises because gaps are found during the simulations. The users are more aware of, let's say, the phishing emails that are coming in and what to do with it. But also in the event of a real incident, right, security incident, the people are more prepared. It's not a surprise. And most importantly, I think that people know exactly what to do. And when you've rehearsed the response, you don't freeze or panic, right? You act. And that's how you reduce damage and keep the operations running and move quickly when it matters most.
Yeah, it just reminds me of times, and you see this a lot more at the enterprise organizations, right? They will periodically do a fire drill. Just do we know how to get all these people out of the building in an orderly manner? And what you're suggesting there is, yeah, that they do if you rehearse it and if you practice it. Same thing if a nefarious email were to come across my computer. We're down to our final couple slides here, and we've got a couple questions coming in. Please, this would be a great opportunity if you have questions that you're thinking about. We're nearly finished with the presentation. Then we'll get to that Q&A. This presentation, George, and I really appreciate you sharing with everyone. This is a lot of knowledge that I think people can take away. They can go back to their organization and they can try to deploy it themselves. Obviously easier said than done. So let's just shift gears for a moment here in our final minutes. How do if I'm in an organization, chances are I have an IT department. That IT department has a lot of responsibilities already, and now George comes in, and I think what you're saying is really wise. We need to layer on this whole other level of security, but that's tough, right? Because IT already has so many things that they need to do. So how does your team help? How does GXA actually fit alongside an internal IT team in making all this work?
One of the first questions we often hear from organizations that have an internal IT is, how does this impact our internal IT team? And my answer is usually, it actually makes their job easier. Because many times the internal IT team is typically focused on day-to-day operations, keeping systems running, supporting users and applications, and solving ongoing technical issues. What we do is come alongside them and bring the structure around security, things like doing the risk assessments, the tabletop exercises, the policies, the strategy development, and reporting, and deploying our virtual CISOs. They get a strategic leader without the cost or complexity of hiring a full-time executive. So we don't replace your IT team. We actually partner with them And so that means that we have the same goals, we develop the same game plan, and we have shared success.
You, I want to, I think I said this term earlier, and I don't think I took the opportunity to define it. And here it came up again. Before we get to our final slide here, George, this is a term that we use at GXA, a virtual CISO. What is that?
Yeah, so a virtual CISO is basically a cybersecurity leader that works with organizations to develop their what we call cybersecurity program. And they work with the leadership team. They work with them to come up with a strategy, implement, and they are accountable for implementing the roadmap. And so think of it as somebody who sits in the board or the leadership team, and their job is to make sure that the organization is secure, that the controls are there, but also they are continually assessing and guiding the organization to ensure that that they are keeping up with the latest threats and the security program is mature.
It's real, and if we were to think this through, right? Often that's going to be in an enterprise organization, that's going to be a full-time role. But at GXA, you offer that as sort of a fractional service, right? So you're getting the mind of that talent without the cost of a full-time employee. Is that typically what it looks like as you deploy it?
Exactly. And the reason is most organizations don't need a full-time CISO, but they still need that expertise. They need, even if it's from a fractional basis, maybe a couple hours a month or something like that, they still need that expertise and insight. And so the role of the virtual CISO is to deploy that expertise to multiple clients and help them build a strong security program.
Excellent. Excellent. All right. We're going to bring this show home now. This has been so much fun. Listen, if you're, the people who are attending the show right now, if you're responsible for your business, where does that leave you when it comes to cybersecurity? How should we be thinking about this, George?
In summary, I would say that the biggest mindset shift is this, that cybersecurity isn't just a technical issue, it's a leadership responsibility. As a leader, you don't need to know how to manage a firewall or configure backups yourself. But as a leader, you do need to know who owns the response plan, how fast can your team act, what is needed to keep the business running if something goes wrong. That shift from assuming that it's covered to owning your role in it is where real resilience begins.
Yeah, and I love those questions because my sense is that there's probably some people who are watching the show and they're like, wow, that is a really good question, and we don't have the answer in our organization. So I always like to say the answer to our questions often starts with another question. So assuming, and by the way, when you exit today's program, we do have a couple survey questions for you. There's just two of them. The first one says, was this information educational for you? Yes or no? And then obviously, would you like to talk to GXA about security? So if somebody is looking forward to taking that next step, assuming they tick that box on the survey, George, what does working with the team actually look like?
Yeah, so the best next step is to schedule a quick, I would say 30-minute discovery call, and we'll help you get a clear picture of where your security is strong and where there might be some gaps in ownership and structure. And then you'll see how your current security posture stacks up against similar organizations in the region. We'll walk you through a sample scorecard and something that you can use to lead with clarity. So no pressure, just a helpful conversation and a clearer path forward.
George Makaye is the CEO of GXA IT, and this has been a lot of fun. Let's go to the Q&A here, and we've got a couple questions here that I'm going to put out there, but please feel free to ask us any more. The first question, George, here is like I think the challenge sometimes with security, right, is it's kind of like insurance. We know we need it. At the same time, we don't want to buy more of it than we need. We don't want to overinvest. And how when I'm looking at security here, how do I think about how much is enough?
That's a great question. One, it's really a balance. It's about balancing risk and impact. Because most organizations, especially small, medium organizations, they don't need every single tool, but you do need the right structure. So start with protecting what matters the most, your people, your data, and your access. From there, scale it based on your risk profile and your business goals and your budget. And so some organizations have a higher risk profile because they're in regulated industries. So, things have to be done a very specific way, and that could translate into a lot more dollars in cybersecurity because of, maybe it's HIPAA because it's a law and you have to do it. So it's all about balancing risk and impact and figuring out what really makes sense. And what I always say, what I always call it, I say, you want to be put yourself in what I call in a responsible position, right, as a leadership, that you've done your due diligence to ensure that you've implemented reasonable security into your organization.
That's really well said. Thank you. Next question. You mentioned those third-party tools, and obviously, yeah, third-party tools can introduce security issues. Look, Microsoft is everywhere, but every now and then we hear about something happening at Microsoft, which impacts our local businesses. And there's a little bit of a dichotomy there, right? Because I can't make Dropbox's security better. I can't make HubSpot security better. But yet you're implying here that, well, you need to know which tools you have in place, and you need to know what happens if you do have a Dropbox or HubSpot or any other vulnerability. So what realistically can we do about those third-party tools?
What we find most of the time is obviously everybody's in the cloud in this day and age. Where I find organizations where they make the mistake is they assume just because it's in the cloud that it's secure, that, oh, Microsoft is protecting my data. I don't know, Dropbox is securing my information. But the reality is it is not necessarily true. So what that means is that you want to do what you can do, which is managing the areas that you have control over. For example, managing who has access, enforcing strong passwords and multi-factor authentication, monitoring activity, and making sure old accounts are shut down. Most breaches happen not because of the tool, but because of how it's being used.
Really interesting answer. Thank you. I feel free we might have time for a couple more questions, but if not, this will be our last question. And if so, I'm okay with that because I think it gets to the heart of the matter. George, you have talked so much today about leadership and ownership. Another idea sounds great on a slide, sounds good on paper. That can be really, really hard, right? You're suggesting really elevating security to a much higher place in the organization. So if I'm in an organization where I'm trying to get that executive buy-in, any advice on how to get it?
Sure, yes. My advice is show how the gaps in security could impact the operations, the revenue, or reputation. And you want to use real examples. You want to keep it simple and speak their language about risk, costs, maybe accountability. When leaders see it as a business issue, not just a technical issue, they typically pay attention.
Yeah, it's a great point, right? And we went over some of those local stories today. So if you're in an organization where you're trying to get that executive buy-in, it's maybe showing those news clippings with the executive team and being like, hey, we definitely don't want to have that happen here. Hey, listen, everyone, thank you so much for spending your time with us today. This has been a fun one. George, thank you for leading us and sharing your knowledge with us. Tremendous guest. You were so generous with your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
We know, hey, listen, everyone, we know you've got a lot on your plate, but listen, hopefully today, like we've been talking about what's at stake too, right? Listen, if you're ready to lead your company's security the way you lead finance or operations or compliance, schedule a call with George and the GXA team. Let's build a system that works when it matters most. For George Makaye and everyone on the GXAI team, I'm Marcus Grimm. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.